Constantinople, May 29th, 1453. A city that had never fallen, not to the Arabs, not to the Persians, not to the Vikings, not to anyone. In 1100 years of siege after siege after siege, the walls had been tested by 30 armies. 30 armies had walked away.
But tonight, the walls were already cracking, and the man who cracked them was 21 years old. He had no beard worth mentioning. He had a prophet's promise, 800 years old, and an army that the world had never seen. By sunrise, the longest-standing empire in human history would be gone, and a boy would become the most feared name on earth. But here's the part that changes everything. He almost didn't make it to the walls at all. To understand how a 21-year-old dismantled something that survived 1,000 years of war, you need to understand what he was walking toward. Edirne, 1451. Mehmed II had just inherited the throne for the second time. The first time, his father took it back. The court had whispered about him. Too young, too ambitious, too obsessed with the city that no one believed could fall. They were right about the obsession, wrong about everything else. Because Constantinople, by 1451, was not the city it used to be. The walls were still there, massive, layered, legendary. But behind those walls, the empire was already hollow. A population that had once filled an entire civilization had shrunk to something closer to a collection of villages, scattered neighborhoods, empty streets between ancient monuments, fewer than 50,000 people inside walls built for 10 times that. The emperor, Constantine XI, held the city with approximately 7,000 to 8,000 defenders. That included Genoese volunteers, Phoenician merchants who had nowhere else to go, and civilians too proud or too exhausted to leave. Imagine you are Constantine in that moment. You have sent letters to every Christian king in Europe. Rome, Venice, Hungary. You have begged. You have offered trade rights. You have offered church unity. The letters came back with sympathy and no soldiers. You are standing on a wall that has not been breached in 1,000 years, and somewhere to the west, across the flat Thracian plain, 60,000 Ottoman soldiers are already moving. If Constantine held, the story you know never happens. But Constantine was not holding. He was waiting, and the ground outside his walls was already shaking with something no city in the medieval world had ever faced.
Early April, 1453. The Ottoman army arrived in waves, not rushing, not chaotic, methodical, deliberate, like something that had already decided how this ended. They came from the land, they came from the sea. Dozens of warships sealed the Bosphorus. The city's supply lines? Gone. But Mehmed had brought something else, something the walls of Constantinople had never met before. The smell reached the city first, sulfur and smoke and burning wood. The particular stench of a foundry working through the night, because Mehmed had commissioned the largest cannons ever built. A Hungarian engineer named Urban had offered his services to Constantine first. Constantine couldn't pay, Mehmed could. Urban built him a cannon so large it took 60 oxen and 400 men to move it. When it fired, you could hear it from 40 miles away. The stone balls it launched weighed over half a ton. For weeks, the bombardment continued. The walls cracked. The defenders repaired them at night, filling gaps with rubble and timber, their hands bleeding from the stone, their eyes burning from the dust. Day after day, the guns fired. The walls came back. The guns fired again. But every night the defenders worked. They had fewer men than the night before, and every morning, Mehmed had the same army he started with. Mehmed watched from his command position near the gate of St. Romanos, the sector where the walls were thinnest, where the bombardment had done the most damage. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't panicking, he was calculating. He sent wave after wave of irregulars, not to win, but to exhaust. Let the defenders spend their strength on men he was willing to lose. Save the Janissaries for last. But 7 weeks in, the walls were still standing. The city had not broken, and in the harbor, 4 Christian supply ships had broken through his naval blockade. In full view of his entire fleet, the Ottoman admirals had failed. Mehmed rode to the shore. He walked his horse into the water, screaming orders at the captains who had let it happen. He had a choice: abandon the siege and go down in history as another name on the list of those who tried and failed, or find a way around the water entirely.
He chose the water, and what he did next had never been done before. Before we continue, if you're watching this and feeling that pull to find out what happens next, hit subscribe. It truly helps us bring you more stories like this. Now, back to Muhammad al-Fatih.
He moved his ships overland. Not a metaphor, not a military strategy borrowed from history. Literally, he had his fleet dragged across dry land, a road of greased wooden logs stretching from the Bosphorus over the ridge of the hills and down into the Golden Horn. 70 ships, pulled by oxen and ropes, and thousands of men through a single night. The people of Constantinople woke the next morning to Ottoman warships floating inside the harbour they thought was sealed. Inside the chain they had stretched across the water to keep exactly this from happening. The city's last psychological wall had just collapsed, without a single soldier crossing the real ones. The final assault came on the night of May 28th, moving into the 29th. Muhammad gathered his commanders. His speech was short. He reminded them of one thing, a promise. 800 years old. A prophet had described this city, had described its fall, had said, and these were the words Muhammad had grown up memorizing, "What a wonderful commander will he be who conquers it? What a wonderful army will that army be?" He looked at his generals. He said, "That army is you." The assault began at midnight. First wave, irregular fighters, Anatolian troops, men sent forward not to breach the walls, but to drain the last reserves of the defenders' strength. The Byzantines held, but they were bleeding now. Second wave, heavier, more organized. The fighting on the walls was hand to hand. Byzantine soldiers and civilian volunteers holding torches against the darkness, pushing back ladders, pouring boiling water on men climbing from below. They held again, but barely. Then the Janissaries, the elite, the disciplined, men who had trained their entire lives for exactly this moment. They hit the gate of St. Romanos like a single fist. The wall at the Kirkoporta gate, a small side entrance, had been left unlocked. A mistake. No one knows by whom. The Ottomans found it. 50 men poured through, then 100. The cry went up across the Byzantine line. "The city has fallen." Constantine the 11th heard it. He pulled off his imperial insignia, the purple robes, the insignia of a 1,000-year throne. He drew his sword. He walked into the fighting. His body was never found. By dawn, the Ottoman flags were on the walls. By mid-morning, Muhammad entered the city on horseback, not charging, not celebrating, walking slowly through the Mise, the great central avenue of a city he had studied since he was a child. He stopped at Hagia Sophia, the largest church in the Christian world, the building that had defined what a capital was for 1,100 years. He dismounted. He bent down. He took a handful of soil and poured it over his turban, a gesture of humility. Then he walked inside. Here is the fact that most retellings skip. Muhammad ordered the looting stopped. Not immediately. There was a period, as was the military custom of the era, where soldiers were permitted to take what the battle had won them. But within hours, he issued orders that changed the terms. Because Muhammad had not come to destroy Constantinople, he had come to inherit it. There is a difference, and that difference is why what he built lasted as long as it did. He began reordering the city the same week. Communities were brought in from across the empire, Greek families, Armenian merchants, Jewish scholars expelled from other lands, all invited, some compelled, to repopulate the empty streets of a city that had been bleeding people for generations. He restored churches as mosques. He protected the Orthodox Patriarchate. He appointed a new patriarch himself, Gennadios Scholarios, and granted him authority over the Christian population of the empire. This was not mercy as weakness, this was governance. Muhammad understood something that the 30 armies before him hadn't. You cannot rule a city you've emptied. A capital needs people. People need reason to stay. He was 21 years old and he already knew this. The city became the new heart of the Ottoman Empire, replacing Edirne as the capital, becoming the political, economic, and cultural center of a power that would stretch from the Danube to the Persian Gulf. But there is something else, something Muhammad carried that no military achievement could explain. He had been told this story his whole life, the prophet's words about this city, about the army that would take it, about the commander who would be praised not for his conquest, but for his character. He didn't just want the walls, he wanted to be worthy of the words. And that changes the question entirely, because the real question was never whether he could take Constantinople, it was whether he could be the commander the prophecy described. May 29th, 1453. didn't just end a city, it ended an era. Most historians mark it as the moment the medieval world closed. Not the fall of Rome in 476, not the Black Death, this. A Tuesday morning in May, when Ottoman flags replaced Byzantine eagles on the walls of the Theodosian fortifications, this is where many draw the line. Because the fall of Constantinople did something that wars usually don't. It moved the intellectual furniture of the world. Byzantine scholars who had stayed in the city until it became clear there was no hope, they left. They carried manuscripts, books that Western Europe hadn't seen in centuries. Greek philosophy, mathematics, medicine. They moved west into Italy, into the courts of Florence and Venice, into the hands of men who would read them and call what happened next the Renaissance. The Ottoman navy now controlled the eastern Mediterranean trade routes, the spice routes, the Silk Roads, the paths that had made the merchants of Venice and Genoa the richest men in Europe. Those routes were now Ottoman. So Europe, desperate, cut off, searching for alternatives, turned west. A Genoese sailor named Columbus would leave Spain 39 years later, looking for a new path to Asia, because this city had fallen. That is the reach of one man's decision. That is what 21 looks like when history chooses you, or when you choose history. Muhammad would go on to campaign for another 28 years. He never stopped. He took Serbia. He took Greece. He moved on Italy before his death stopped him. He died at 49. His enemies called him the terror of the world. His own people called him something simpler, Al-Fatih, the opener. We started with a boy on a wall. You might have assumed this was a story about war, or conquest, or the fall of empires. It wasn't. It was a story about preparation meeting the moment it was built for. Muhammad al-Fatih didn't stumble into Constantinople. He studied it from childhood. He learned Greek to read its histories. He memorized its fortifications. He commissioned weapons specifically designed for walls that no previous weapon could crack. When every other commander looked at those walls and saw an obstacle, he looked at them and saw a problem with a solution he hadn't found yet. That is the difference between someone who inherits history and someone who makes it. He died at 49. He had built the thing, set it in motion. The empire he handed forward would run for another 460 years. The walls he broke in 1453 still stand today, cracked, patched, ancient, in a city that carries 3 names and the memory of everything that has ever ended there. But here is the question that history doesn't answer for you. What do you do with a prophecy? Do you wait for it, or do you become it? Muhammad al-Fatih chose, but he was not the last man in this part of the world to look at something that had never been done and decide that was the wrong reason not to try. 100 years after this wall fell, another man stood at another impossible threshold. He didn't have cannons. He didn't have an army. He had something more dangerous. And that story is one the history books buried on purpose.